They never feared the plant. They feared what it could unlock. From ancient temples to hidden ceremonies, cannabis has long been a tool for spiritual transformation, not a recreational escape. But you were never told that. Instead, you were handed a version of reality shaped by fear, filtered through laws, and wrapped in control. They buried the sacred beneath decades of propaganda, distorting truth until the plant that once guided seekers to the divine became a punchline, a crime, a Schedule 1 threat. But here's the truth. They hoped you'd never remember. You were never meant to forget who you are. Cannabis was never just about getting high. It was about seeing clearly, about softening the ego, expanding the heart, and tuning the mind to frequencies most people will never touch. You've been taught to look at weed as something that dulls, but in reality, it's something that reveals. And once you see what it can show you, you'll understand why they tried so hard to keep it hidden. Long before laws were written to criminalize it, cannabis was considered holy. It was not inhaled in defiance. It was offered in devotion. In ancient India, it was known as sacred grass, a plant said to belong to Shiva, the god of destruction and rebirth. In Egypt, it was mixed into oils, burned in rituals, and linked to healing temples. Indigenous tribes in the Americas used it ceremonially, not casually, shared in silence, not in smoke-filled rebellion. This plant wasn't entertainment. It was a bridge, a living doorway to the divine. And the people who knew that, who passed those teachings down through generations, didn't see cannabis as a threat. They saw it as a teacher, a gentle disruptor of ego, a guide into realms beyond what the waking mind could grasp. But all of that, every trace of reverence, every echo of sacred use, was buried under a war that was never really about drugs. What you've been told is that cannabis is dangerous, addictive, and lazy-making. But what you weren't told is that the real danger was never the plant. It was what the plant could wake up. The war on cannabis was not about protecting people. It was about protecting systems, systems that rely on you being disconnected from your inner world. Because if you begin to see clearly, to feel fully, to question what you've blindly accepted, you become harder to control. And nothing disrupts control more gently or more powerfully than a tool that makes you present, aware, and conscious of the prison you've been living in. This is why the war on drugs was never truly about substances. It was a war on consciousness, on alternative ways of knowing, on anything that offered access to spiritual states without permission from organized religion or state-approved ideology. Cannabis didn't fit the system's version of spirituality because it couldn't be owned, taxed, or confined within a Sunday sermon. It offered direct experience, not second-hand belief, and that made it dangerous, not to the body, but to the blueprint of control. So they flipped the narrative. They rebranded the sacred as scandalous. The herb became weed, the ritual became rebellion, and the ancient teacher was reduced to a joke. They made it look stupid so you'd never look deeper. They made users seem weak, so you'd never wonder why thinkers, artists, healers, and mystics kept returning to it. They buried the wisdom and replaced it with warnings, and it worked, until now. There's a reason this plant keeps resurfacing in the conversation, despite decades of suppression. There's a reason seekers still feel called to it, even in a world where its image has been so distorted, because the truth cannot be deleted, only delayed. Cannabis carries something older than culture, older than law. It is not here to fix your problems. It is not a shortcut to enlightenment. But when used with intention, in the right frame, with the right respect, it has the potential to peel back the layers of programming and reveal what's underneath. We explore these deeper layers in our free newsletter, Insights Academy, where we share what we can't say openly here. Sign up using the link in the description to access exclusive content, and for a limited time, you'll receive a free digital copy of The Kabbalion. When we talk about cannabis, we are not talking about escapism. We are talking about access. Access to self, access to stillness, access to the truth you buried under years of conditioning. The truth is this: cannabis can't save you. It was never meant to. It was designed to show you the parts of yourself you've been taught to avoid. and in that way it becomes a kind of spiritual mirror, one that doesn't flatter but reveals. It doesn't let you run, it asks you to sit. Not all will be ready for that reflection. Many won't like what they see. But those who are willing to face it will begin to understand what ancient cultures always knew, that this plant is not here to entertain you. It's here to awaken you. Cannabis doesn't give you answers. It removes the noise so you can hear the ones that were already there. And the first thing it usually silences is your ego, that constant voice in your head telling you who you are, what you're supposed to do, what people think of you, and what you need to become to be enough. That voice begins to fade when cannabis is used consciously. And when it does, what's left behind isn't emptiness. It's presence. It's you without the mask. Most people don't realize how loud their ego has been until the volume is turned down. We've been conditioned to think of ourselves as identities, roles, achievements, traumas, beliefs. But beneath all of that is something deeper. Awareness, pure, observing, still. That's the part of you spiritual traditions call the self, the witness, the soul, and cannabis, when approached with respect and intention, can act as a bridge to that awareness. It creates space. It softens the tight grip of control we keep over our own thoughts. And in that softening, something begins to break open, not in a violent way but like mist parting around a mountain. What's revealed is what's always been there. Your essence, unfiltered by fear or expectation. But this is where most people misunderstand the power of the plant. They think it's about the high, about the escape, about forgetting. But cannabis, when used consciously, isn't an escape, it's an excavation. It brings up the thoughts you've avoided, the emotions you've suppressed, and the truths you've been too distracted to face. It holds up a mirror, not to the version of you you show to the world, but to the version you've forgotten exists. The part of you that doesn't need validation, that doesn't need to hustle for worthiness, that doesn't live in the past or obsess over the future, the part of you that simply is. And when that part rises to the surface, the ego panics, because the ego only knows how to survive through control. It doesn't want to be seen through, it doesn't want to dissolve, it wants to dominate. So when cannabis begins to quiet the ego, resistance often shows up too. Some people feel anxious, some feel paranoid. That's not the weed betraying you, that's the ego losing grip. You're not broken, you're seeing clearly. The discomfort is part of the detox. That's why intention is everything. If you come to cannabis seeking numbness, you'll find it. If you come seeking elevation, you might find that too. But not before you face what's in the way. The plant doesn't lie, it amplifies. It doesn't manufacture feelings, it reveals them. That's why sacred cultures didn't take it lightly. They prepared themselves, they fasted, they prayed, they set intentions, because they understood what modern users often forget, that what you bring into the space is what you'll meet within it. Used unconsciously, cannabis can become a crutch, a way to bypass healing, a mask for pain. But used with care, it becomes a tool of liberation, not because it fixes you, but because it shows you what needs fixing. Not because it creates peace, but because it exposes everything that's standing in its way. Ego, fear, grief, shame, they all rise to the surface. And in that rising, there's an opportunity not to run, not to judge, but to sit, to breathe, to feel, to heal. Cannabis is not enlightenment, but it can point to it. It's not God, but it can soften the veil. And sometimes that's all we need. A crack in the surface, a glimpse of something bigger than ourselves. And in that glimpse we remember that we are not the voice in our heads. We are the awareness behind it. Still, silent, eternal. They told you it was just a chemical, a compound, a substance that alters the brain in predictable ways. But those who've gone deep enough, who've sat with the plant in silence, with reverence, with no need to explain what they feel, know something else. Cannabis doesn't just touch the mind, it touches the spirit. And at the center of that mystery lies something ancient, something dismissed, something feared and forgotten. The pineal gland. You've heard it called the third eye, the seat of the soul, the gateway to higher consciousness. Not metaphorically, but biologically. Tucked away between the two hemispheres of the brain, The pineal gland regulates your sleep cycles, yes, but it also plays a role in visions, dreams, and mystical states of perception. Civilizations long before ours knew this. In Egypt, the Eye of Horus wasn't just art. It was a symbolic representation of the pineal gland. In Hinduism, the bindi wasn't just decorative. It marked the center of spiritual sight. And in esoteric traditions from Hermeticism to Theosophy, the pineal gland is revered as the organ that sees what the physical eyes cannot. So why does this matter? Because cannabis, specifically its psychoactive component, THC, appears to interact with this exact center of spiritual perception. Not by accident, not as a side effect, but possibly by design. You see, the pineal gland is incredibly sensitive to changes in consciousness. It's influenced by light, by silence, by breathwork, and some argue by plant-based molecules that expand awareness. While science is still catching up to what mystics have long suspected, some researchers and spiritual explorers believe THC stimulates blood flow to the pineal gland, enhancing its receptivity. The result, an altered perception of time, of thought, of identity, a loosening of the mind's grip on fixed reality, a dissolving of boundaries between what's inside and what's out. Port. You may have experienced this yourself without knowing what to call it. That moment when colors feel richer, when silence feels alive, when thoughts stretch out like waves instead of colliding like traffic. That's not a high, that's perception shifting. That's your mind being rerouted from the rational into the intuitive. The pineal gland doesn't operate in language. It whispers in symbols, sensations, frequencies, and cannabis, when approached correctly, can help you hear it, but not if you're chasing distraction. Not if you're numbing out. That kind of use muddies the waters, clouds the channel. If the pineal gland is a lens, then intention is the cloth that clears it. You don't access higher consciousness by accident. You tune into it, and tuning requires stillness, ritual, humility. This is why ancient cultures paired sacred plants with sacred practice. It wasn't just about what you consumed. It was about how, where, and why. The environment mattered, the mindset mattered, the purpose mattered, because the deeper layers of consciousness don't reveal themselves to tourists. They open to pilgrims. Of course, this kind of talk makes the scientific mind uncomfortable. It prefers certainty, measurement, replicability. But consciousness is not a lab experiment. It's not a code you can crack with data alone, and that's the real tension. The pineal gland sits at the crossroads of science and spirit, a biological structure with metaphysical implications, and cannabis, humble and ancient, dares to walk that line. It reminds us that not everything that's real is visible, that not everything that heals can be measured. That's the secret modern society fears the most. That a simple plant, one that grows freely, that asks nothing in return, might hold the key to experiences once reserved for saints and sages. That you don't need a temple or a priest to feel divine. That you don't need a degree or a doctrine to explore the infinite. Just a willingness to listen, to surrender, to let go of the mind's grip on what's possible, and allow the body, the breath, and the soul to meet in one quiet, undeniable moment of truth. Everything is vibration. You've heard that before. Maybe you nodded. Maybe you dismissed it as another spiritual cliché. But if you sit with it long enough, if you really feel into it, you'll sense the truth vibrating beneath the words. Every thought, every emotion, every word you speak carries a frequency. Joy vibrates higher than shame. Gratitude hums higher than fear. Love isn't just an emotion, it's a resonance. And your body, your mind, your very state of being is constantly tuning itself to whatever frequency you feed it. This is where cannabis becomes more than a chemical experience. It becomes a tuning device. Used without intention, it can cloud your signal, distort the frequency, numb the receiver. But used with presence, it can do something entirely different. It can bring you back into alignment, into coherence, into harmony with parts of yourself you forgot how to hear. Cannabis doesn't inject wisdom into you. It tunes your awareness to the wisdom that's already been whispering. It amplifies what's within. If you're anxious, it might surface that anxiety. If you're grieving, it might bring the pain closer. But if you're ready to be honest, still open, it can lift you into states of presence most people only touch through years of meditation or deep breath work. That's not a fantasy, it's a physiological shift. When cannabis interacts with your endocannabinoid system, it doesn't just affect the body, it slows the brain's electrical activity into theta and alpha waves, the same brain waves associated with dream states, deep meditation, and altered perception. In these states, time softens, thought slows, awareness expands. You're not asleep, but you're not fully anchored in the rigid structure of logic either. You begin to perceive the world less through concepts and more through feeling. And in that space, vibration becomes more than metaphor. It becomes experience. You start to notice how music moves through you instead of at you, how colors speak, how silence becomes thick with presence. You begin to feel the energy behind what people say, not just the words. You sense shifts in your own field, subtle tensions in the body, quiet emotional undercurrents you've been ignoring. Cannabis doesn't create those sensations, it illuminates them. It invites you to pay attention, to attune, to shift. But the plant doesn't force you. It waits, it listens, it reflects. And this is why it's so easily misunderstood. The same joint that opens one person to peace can push another into paranoia. Why? Because the plant meets you where you are. It tunes into your internal station and amplifies the signal. That's not a defect. It's the feature. It's why intentional use is not optional. It's the doorway. If you step into the experience without preparing your mind, your space, your energy, you'll be dragged through frequencies you weren't ready to face. But if you step in with clarity and respect, the plant becomes a frequency magnifier, amplifying insight, dissolving barriers, raising vibration. Some call it plant medicine, others call it a psychoactive. Some say it connects to spirit, others say it's just chemicals. But those who've used it as a sacred ally know this: cannabis has a vibration. And when you're attuned to it, it doesn't dull your senses, it sharpens them. It doesn't take you out of your body, it drops you deeper into it. You begin to feel more, not less. You begin to question more, not follow blindly. And that's why it's dangerous. Not to your health, but to your conditioning. Because the moment you start feeling at a higher frequency, the old narratives no longer stick. The old fears begin to dissolve. You stop fitting into boxes you were never meant to shrink into. And suddenly, you remember what they hoped you'd forget, that your vibration is your power, and you've always had the ability to shift it. Not everyone who smokes is seeking truth. Some are just running from pain. Some are chasing a sensation, a release, a break from the static of their everyday life. And that's where the difference lies, not in the plant, but in the person. Cannabis itself is neutral. It doesn't judge. It doesn't discriminate. It meets you where you are, but how you use it, that's everything. That's the difference between elevation and escapism, between being high and being hollow. There's a reason some people emerge from a cannabis experience with deeper clarity, emotional healing, or spiritual insight, while others become stuck, foggy, or numb. The plant isn't inconsistent. The approach is. When you treat cannabis like a sacred tool, it responds like one. When you treat it like a disposable distraction, it becomes just that. This is not about shame. It's about awareness. Because the difference between medicine and poison has always been dosage and intent. Most people were never taught this. They were either handed fear or indulgence. Either it was demonized entirely or glorified as a lifestyle. Neither version reflects the truth. Real power doesn't live in extremes. It lives in presence. Conscious use doesn't mean smoking every day under the illusion of being spiritual. It means asking why you're reaching for it at all. Is it to soften the ego, to connect inward, to observe your thoughts with curiosity rather than fear? Or is it to blur the discomfort you don't want to face? Cannabis is not here to fix your life. It's not a spiritual shortcut. It's not a replacement for the inner work. But it can be a companion to it, a mirror that gently, and sometimes not so gently, reveals what you've buried beneath productivity, perfectionism, or pain. If you show up honestly, it shows up honestly. If you show up distracted, it can magnify that too. That's why some people feel more anxious or disconnected after smoking. Not because the plant betrayed them, but because it surfaced a frequency they weren't ready to face. In ancient traditions, there was no such thing as casual consumption of sacred substances. Cannabis, like other plant teachers, was approached with ritual. Space was cleared, intentions were set, there was silence, there was reverence. It wasn't about escaping the world, it was about seeing it differently, seeing yourself differently, and then taking that vision and integrating it into everyday life. That's the part people forget. Insight is nothing without embodiment. Awareness is wasted if you return to the same patterns after the high fades. So if you're using cannabis, ask yourself, is this sharpening me or sedating me? Is it opening me or helping me hide? There's no shame in needing relief. But don't mistake relief for healing. Healing asks more of you. It asks you to stay present with the discomfort, to face the truth beneath the tension, to let go of the stories that are suffocating your spirit. And cannabis, when used with clarity, can be an ally in that process, not by doing the work for you, but by showing you where the work begins. The truth is, not everyone is ready for that level of honesty. Many people will continue to use the plant to float above their pain, to blur the sharp edges of a life they feel trapped in. And maybe that's okay, for a while. But eventually the soul gets restless. The mask stops working. The numbness loses its charm. And when that day comes, the plant will still be there, waiting not to save you, not to solve you, but to sit beside you, as you face yourself fully, courageously present. Because the higher state isn't a chemical, it's a choice, a state of being, a vibration you tune into, not one you consume passively. And when you remember that, when you treat cannabis not as a crutch, but as a key, you begin to unlock something deeper than any high could offer. Awareness that stays with you long after the smoke clears. You've been taught to see plants as passive, as resources, things to harvest, process, package, consume. But in older worlds, the ones our ancestors walked before concrete, buried soil, plants weren't seen as things. They were seen as beings. And some weren't just alive, they were considered intelligent. Not in the way humans define intelligence, but in the way nature does, through vibration, response, adaptation, and connection. Cannabis wasn't just a plant to them, it was a presence, a spirit, a teacher. This isn't metaphor. In countless shamanic traditions across the globe, from the Amazon basin to the Himalayan foothills, plants are understood to carry a consciousness. Not all of them speak, not all of them guide, but some, like ayahuasca, peyote, psilocybin mushrooms, and yes, cannabis, have been approached as allies in the spiritual journey, not because they produce a chemical high, but because they produce a relationship, one that deepens with time, with listening, with respect. You don't smoke cannabis the way you use a tool. You commune with it, you sit with it, you ask it questions, not always out loud but inwardly. And sometimes, if your mind is still enough, it answers, not in language, but in knowing, in insight, in the gentle surfacing of things you didn't realize were hiding inside you. That insight is not coming from the plant itself, it's coming from within you. But the plant is the amplifier, the guide, the sacred witness to your remembrance. This is why indigenous shamans speak of plant spirits, not as fantasy, but as lived experience. They don't see these plants as substances. They see them as teachers with personalities, preferences, and energy. Cannabis is described by some as feminine in spirit, gentle, nurturing, but direct, not aggressive, but also not interested in your delusions. When you use it with reverence, it becomes like an elder who shows you what you're ready to see, not what you want to see. Modern science doesn't have language for this. It's just beginning to acknowledge that trees communicate through root systems, that fungi form vast underground networks that share nutrients, warnings, and memory. What if plants are far more conscious than we've ever dared to admit? What if cannabis doesn't just respond to your brain chemistry, but your presence, your energy, your intention? Maybe this is why cannabis feels so different depending on who uses it. Two people can smoke the same amount of the same strain and have entirely different experience. One feels grounded and inspired. The other feels anxious or scattered. The difference isn't the plant, it's the frequency of the user. Because cannabis doesn't lead you anywhere you're not already pointing toward. It enhances, it reveals, it listens. So how do you approach a being that listens? You show up honestly. You strip the performance. You set an intention. Not a goal, but a vibration. Something like, show me what I need to see, or help me sit with what I've been avoiding. And then you wait. You listen back. You don't force insight. You create the conditions for it to arise, and when it does, you don't argue. You sit with it. You write it down. You breathe into it. You thank the plant, not for giving you something you didn't have, but for helping you find what was already inside you. That is the nature of plant consciousness. It doesn't dominate. It partners. It guides through presence, not power. And if you treat cannabis this way, as a being, not a thing, everything changes. The high becomes sacred. The experience becomes dialogue. The ritual becomes relationship. And your inner world stops being a place you escape and starts becoming a space you explore. Cannabis is not just a plant, it's a portal. And the more consciously you enter that portal, the more clearly you'll hear the voice that's been trying to reach you all along, not from the sky, not from another realm, but from within. Waiting for the noise to quiet, for the fog to clear, for the space to open, and for you to remember, you're not here to use this plant. You're here to learn from it. Music. There's a reason this plant has been feared, outlawed and silenced for generations. And it has nothing to do with public safety. It's not about addiction. It's not about health. It's about control. Because a mind expanded is harder to manipulate. A person connected to their own inner truth is harder to dominate. And cannabis, when used consciously, threatens every structure that depends on your compliance. That's why they had to reframe it, not just ban it, but vilify it, ridicule it, strip it of its sacred history, and reduce it to a punchline, a vice, a crime. Ask yourself, why did cultures that claimed moral superiority fight so hard to criminalize a plant that has never caused mass destruction, never led to violent outbreaks, never incited chaos in the streets? Why did the same governments that promoted alcohol, encouraged pharmaceutical dependency, and profited from war, declare war on a herb? The answer has nothing to do with weed itself, and everything to do with what weed could wake up. Because cannabis doesn't just relax the body, it opens the door to awareness. It reveals patterns. It disrupts the loop. And that's not good for business, if the business thrives on your unconscious repetition. They don't want you asking why you feel empty after buying what you were told would make you happy. They don't want you pausing long enough to wonder if your career was built around someone else's dream. They don't want you questioning the rituals they handed you: wake, work, consume, repeat. But cannabis slows things down. It creates gaps in the noise. And in those gaps, questions arise. Dangerous questions. Questions that lead to shifts. Questions that break cycles. This is why spiritual tools have always been targeted by empires and institutions. The church burned herbalists. Colonial governments outlawed indigenous ceremonies. Sacred plants were painted as threats because they opened doors that systems of power work tirelessly to keep shut. You weren't meant to connect to the divine directly. You were meant to go through them, through their doctrine, their structure, their rules. Cannabis short-circuits that system. It offers direct experience, and direct experience is the enemy of dogma. But suppression doesn't just happen through law, it happens through culture. Think about how cannabis users are portrayed in media: lazy, confused, incoherent. Rarely are they shown as seekers, artists, healers, visionaries. That's not by accident, that's conditioning. If they can make you laugh at it, you won't look deeper. If they can make you feel ashamed of it, you won't speak about it with reverence. And if you don't speak with reverence, the lineage of sacred use dies in silence. But here's the truth: they can't kill. The plant remembers. The spirit of cannabis has survived empires, borders, censorship, and stigma. It's been passed hand to hand, word to word, memory to memory, in temples and forests, in bedrooms and gardens, in chants and in silence. And now it's resurfacing again, not just as medicine, but as mirror, not just for anxiety or appetite, but for awakening. They don't want you to know this, because once you do, you start asking different questions. You start seeing beyond the smoke. You realize the war wasn't on drugs. It was on consciousness. The weapon wasn't fear. It was distraction. And the goal wasn't safety. It was obedience. And yet, in the quiet, the plant persists, waiting for those who are ready, those who aren't looking for escape, but for meaning, those who sense there's more to this life than what we've been told, those who remember that sacred doesn't always come in robes or rituals. It sometimes comes in green leaves and rolling papers. When you reclaim the plant's truth, you reclaim part of your own, the part that was taught to doubt your instincts, the part that was told spirituality comes from books and buildings, not from within. But cannabis doesn't ask for your belief. It asks for your attention. It doesn't care about your dogma. It cares about your presence. And that's what makes it dangerous, not to your health, but to the systems that profit from your spiritual silence. Something is shifting, quietly, at first, but undeniably. What was once demonized is now being remembered. The world is waking up to cannabis, not as a drug, not as a rebellion, but as a sacred ally, one that never stopped whispering, even while it was being silenced. This isn't about trends or legalization. It's about remembrance, a return to what was always true, buried under decades of misinformation and cultural manipulation. The plant was never the problem. Our disconnection was. You can feel it in the rise of plant ceremonies, in the meditative smoke rituals, in the resurgence of conscious cannabis communities, who gather not to escape but to explore. You see it in the artists using cannabis to channel new frequencies, in the seekers using it to deepen breathwork and stillness, in the teachers integrating it into mindfulness and spiritual healing. This is not the weed culture the world once mocked. This is something else, something older, something sacred, a quiet revolution of remembering, because awakening isn't loud. It doesn't come with fireworks or spectacle. It comes in the soft moments when you light a joint with intention instead of habit, when you sit in silence and feel your own breath for the first time in weeks, when the noise of the world fades just long enough for you to remember who you were before you were programmed to forget. Cannabis, in these moments, isn't the center of the experience. It's the door, a humble, ancient door that opens inward. But that door is not for everyone, not every time. The plant is patient, but it is precise. It will meet you where you are, and it won't carry you anywhere you're not willing to go. That's why rituals are reappearing, not because we need more rules, but because reverence creates readiness. When you approach cannabis, the way you would approach a sacred text or a trusted teacher, it begins to respond differently, not as a substance but as a presence, not as something to be consumed, but as something to be communed with. There is no one way to reclaim this ally. Some will find it through meditation and stillness, others through dance, movement, or creative expression. Some will use it rarely, ceremonially, others more often but with clear boundaries and care. The point isn't the method, it's the mindset. It's not about becoming a spiritual cannabis user. It's about becoming conscious in how you live, how you feel, how you relate to the natural world and to yourself. And if you've misused it before, if you've used it to run, to numb, to disconnect, that doesn't disqualify you. It qualifies you, because those are the experiences that teach, the ones that show you what the plant is not. And from there you can begin again, with more clarity, with more humility, with more understanding that cannabis isn't your answer, it's your invitation, a mirror, a tool, a companion on a path only you can walk. This is what the ancients knew, that plants carry codes, that the earth holds medicine for more than the body. It holds it for the soul, that we were never meant to conquer nature. When you remember that what you're holding in your hand is more than plant, it's a portal. We are living in a time of great forgetting and great remembering. The systems built to keep you asleep are starting to crack, and through those cracks, ancient wisdom begins to pour back in. Cannabis is part of that wisdom, not as a cure-all or a spiritual shortcut, but as a sacred key, one that unlocks not just new experiences but new understandings of what it means to be alive, awake, and connected. For too long, the dominant narrative has painted cannabis with the same brush used to dull your instincts and silence your intuition. They told you it was lazy, destructive, dangerous. But the real danger was never the plant, it was your potential, once awakened. This is why cannabis has been suppressed for so long, not because it makes you unproductive, but because it makes you question the system, the conditioning, the artificial pace of life. Question why we're so disconnected from the earth, from spirit, and from each other. When you're deeply present, when you're operating from love instead of fear, when your perception cracks open to show you how infinite you really are, that's when the old systems tremble. That's when the illusion begins to dissolve. And it's no coincidence that now, as more people seek truth, healing, and autonomy, cannabis is rising again. But this time, it must rise with reverence. This time, it cannot be commodified into oblivion or swallowed by the same machine that once feared it. This time, the invitation is different. It's about going beyond consumption and into communion, not asking what cannabis can do for you, but how you can honor its presence in your life, how you can use it not as a way out, but as a way deeper in. That means asking the hard questions. Why do I reach for this? What am I running from or running toward? Is this ceremony or is this escape? Am I amplifying my awareness or numbing it? There's no judgment in the asking, only truth, and it's truth that frees you. Because spiritual tools only work when you do. Cannabis is not an answer in itself, it's an accelerator. It speeds up whatever's already within you. That's why it demands awareness. It will amplify your intention, but it will also amplify your avoidance, and when used unconsciously, it can become just another trap, disguised as liberation. But you're here reading this, thinking, remembering, and that means you're ready. Ready to begin again, not just with cannabis, but with your whole life. Ready to examine what's been handed to you and choose differently, to choose presence over numbness, curiosity over fear, intention over impulse. And that's what true spiritual practice is. It's not about purity or perfection, it's about showing up honestly, consciously, willingly. So let cannabis be your ally, not your crutch. Let it be a bridge between you and the parts of yourself you've forgotten. Let it be the reminder that nature is not separate from spirit, and neither are you. Let it be sacred again. Because when used with intention, this plant doesn't just change your mind, it reintroduces you to your soul. And if you've resonated with this journey, if something in you feels like it's just beginning to wake up, don't let it end here. Join our free newsletter, Insights Academy, where we share the knowledge too deep for platforms like this. As a thank you, you'll receive a free digital copy of the ancient Hermetic text, the Kybalion, for a limited time. The link is in the description. Let this be your beginning, not your end. The world is full of noise, distractions crafted to lull you back into forgetting. But the decision to stay awake, to stay aware, is always yours. If you long to reconnect with the sacred, whether through cannabis, through deep presence, or through your own inner wisdom, you must choose it consciously, again and again. This is the quiet revolution of awareness, the gentle rebellion of remembering who you are, and it begins with a single honest moment. If this message touched something within you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it."